Let's go back to the Just Java app for a moment. Let's look at the main activity class display message method. Things are starting to make a little more sense in here. We already recognize that we're creating a variable called order summary text view, and the data type of this variable was text view. We didn't understand this part yet, though. On the next line, we call a method on this text view object. We use the same variable name as declared up here. So we call order summary text view dot set text. Then we pass a string as an input to the method. The string message originally came as an input parameter to the display message method. Now let's dig into this part of the code which we don't understand yet. It looks like findViewById is a method call though, because it's preceding these parentheses with what looks like an input argument. But what's weird is that this method isn't defined anywhere in this class. If I double click on this name and then hit Command F, or Control F if you're on Windows, then we can try to do a search in this file. I only see 2 occurrences of findViewById, and they're used in similar ways. But I don't see any method that's called findViewById. Speaking of which, earlier in the main activity class, we see a call to set content view. But if you search for this in the file, it's also not defined in the main activity. So where are these methods defined? Well, main activity is actually a pretty short file. It's only about 90 lines long. But there's actually more to this class than meets the eye. The code says extends AppCompat activity. This means that the main activity is an extension of the functionality in the AppCompat activity class. On your computer, if you see action bar activity here, that's okay. That's just an older version of this. The latest version that you should be using is AppCompat activity. An AppCompat activity gives us backward compatibility support on older Android devices. The AppCompat activity is part of the Android support library. It allows us to use the latest UI features on Android while still working on older Android devices. By extending the AppCompat activity class, we're getting all the functionality, all the state and the methods from here within the main activity for free. We don't have to copy and paste any code from here. We can just simply extend that class. If you're interested, you can find out more information on AppCompat activity by Googling for it. Here's the reference doc for the AppCompat activity class. Since I have the Chrome extension installed, I can view the source as well. And this is the code for where the AppCompat activity class is defined. You can see that there's a lot of functionality here. But the key message is that you don't have to understand how it's implemented. All you need to know is that when you extend AppCompat activity, you get all of this functionality for free. At a high level, you can visualize it like this. This is a class definition for main activity, and say you have some methods defined here. When we extend AppCompat activity, then we can access the state and the methods from AppCompat activity. Now they're not physically added to the main activity class, but you can imagine that they're there because you can still reference the state and the methods as well. And that's how our code can refer to things like setContentView or findViewById because we inherited those methods. We didn't define them in the main activity. The main activity is shown as a screen on the device, but we didn't write the code for that in the main activity. We inherited that as well. We don't have the state and the methods from AppCompat activity directly in the class, but now we know that they're there and we can refer to them. Speaking of inheriting things, there's good and bad parts about that. Sometimes we'll want to inherit behavior, but other times we might want to modify it slightly. If you want to change some of the behavior from this inherited class, you can override certain methods. You can add this @override text on top of a method so that the computer knows that you don't want the version of the method from the AppCompat activity, but instead you want this version that you've defined here. This is a tricky topic and it requires a lot of practice, but we have seen one example of overriding a method from the AppCompat activity class, and that method is the onCreate method. By overriding the onCreate method in the main activity, we're specifying our own implementation for what should happen when that method is called. Don't worry if you don't understand this right away. I'm just giving you a brief overview of a bunch of object-oriented programming concepts. It's absolutely expected that you would still have lingering questions and still need to read up more on these topics in order to fully understand them. Another way to visualize the relationship between the main activity and the AppCompat activity classes is to draw a class hierarchy diagram. This is different from a view hierarchy diagram. because a view hierarchy diagram shows a tree of views that are shown on a screen. The class hierarchy diagram shows the relationship between different Java classes. We have AppCompat activity as a superclass. Since main activity extends from AppCompat activity, then this is known as the subclass. So whenever you see this class definition, whatever you extend is known as the superclass. This would be the subclass. So if you created another activity called detail activity and you extended AppCompat activity, this would be the subclass and this would be the superclass. Here's another example of Java class inheritance. If you think about it, the text view, image view, and button views all have some common aspects to them. All of these views have a width and a height on the screen. We haven't learned this yet, but they also have a visibility state, so they can all be made invisible or visible. There are a couple of other properties as well that are common among them. Instead of writing out code for these properties within the text view class, and then copying it over to image view and then button class, we can do something a little smarter. We can create a view class. We can extract the common properties among all of these views and then put them inside this view class. That way, the code only has to be written once. But then how do we make the connection between the text view class and the view class? If you're thinking inheritance, you're correct. In the TextView Java file, we're going to define the TextView class. That way, we'll inherit all the state and the methods from the view class. Then we won't have to have as much code in the TextView class because part of the functionality is already written in the view class. The same would apply for the image view and button classes. We don't have to write as much code. In these files, we only have to write about what's different about the image view compared to the view class. I think of this as specifying a delta. So the image view class only has to specify what's different about the image view compared to the view class. If we don't want to inherit certain behavior from the view class, we can just specify the updated behavior within the image view class or any of these classes. And to remind you of the terminology, in this case, text view would be the subclass and view would be the superclass. If we go back to the documentation for the TextView class, we actually understand this part now. It says TextView extends view. Now we know that it means that we're inheriting the state and the methods from the view class. And down here is a class hierarchy diagram. It shows that the TextView class is inheriting from the view class. And in turn, the view class inherits from the object class. If you explore around, you can find other classes, like the editText class, which actually extends from the TextView class. So it takes the behavior from the TextView class and then adds a little more specific functionality to it. So editText extends from TextView, and TextView extends from view, and view extends from object. And this is the class hierarchy diagram. There's a lot going on, and you can look at it for hours, but let me just show you one thing on the TextView documentation page. I want to show you the method for set visibility. Here's the Java method for set visibility within the TextView class. This changes whether the view is visible or not. If I click on this method, it actually brings me to the view class, and then it describes what this method does. So you can see that a TextView object has the set visibility method, but it was actually inherited from the view class. So we got this functionality for free from the view class. Okay, we just covered a ton of new concepts. Normally, this would be spread out over a semester of a computer science course. We're going to do a little bit of practice now, and hopefully it'll start to connect the dots for you. But know that it'll take a lot more time and practice until you fully grasp these concepts. Okay, for this exercise, I want you to create another new Android app because we don't want to mess up the Just Java app. Once you create the project, then run the app. Once you create your app, you're going to see a main activity file. That main activity file will extend from AppCompat activity. In your version of Android Studio, if the main activity extends from action bar activity instead, that's okay too. That's just an older version of AppCompat activity. By removing this method override, we're going to fall back to the way that the onCreate method appeared in the AppCompat activity class. The presence of this method says we want different behavior in the main activity for the onCreate method. So removing it brings us back to the original behavior in the AppCompat activity class. When you run the app, what do you notice is different compared to when you first ran the app? Write your answer in this text box.